Welcome everyone to this week's video. Today we are on Fish Friday number 143 and we have a good one for you today. Today's fish is a fish that was requested by a member of the community. A really cool fish. Beautiful fish actually. Much more beautiful than you think just looking at the pictures. Um, I apologize. I am sick right now, so that's why I sound a little nasally. I'm going to try and not cough. I'm going to try my best anyway. But regardless, let's get into the fish. Today's fish that we're going to be talking about is, bam, the common creek chub. Now, the common creek chub, or scientific name Somatolus atromaculatus, again, that is Somatolus atromaculatus. It is part of the family Cyprididae, which is the family of carps and minnows. Now, it's native to the eastern United States and Canada. And when I say eastern US, I mean literally eastern half, not just like the eastern seaboard. They can stretch all the way to eastern Texas. That's where I've caught this fish, and it's beautiful, and I enjoy catching them. In those areas, you're going to find them in primarily small to medium-sized rivers and streams. They can get into lakes, but they're really not preferable. Even in slower waters, at most of their life, they're not found even like the slower pools of those rivers and streams. But they can be found there. You can find them in a variety of substrates, sand, gravel, boulders, whatever. You can find them in almost any substrate type, but they do seem to gravitate towards vegetation, which is important to note. Now, they are a small fish. They average about 127 to 178 millimeters, which is about 5 to 7 inches. But they can get up to about 300 millimeters, which is about 12 inches. So they can get significantly larger than the average. Just an interesting little tidbit that I found. It is the largest minnow native to Missouri. I say native because obviously with common carp and things like that, including goldfish, there are larger minnows out there. A little interesting tidbit is that the males are actually larger than the females. That's usually not the case. Usually females are larger than males. We've talked about this before. The larger the female, the more eggs she can produce during reproduction. So having males larger than females is a little bit of an interesting fact. They do have a cylindrical body. You can tell from this sort of picture here. Now, they are a little dorsolaterally compressed, meaning a little bit compressed at the side. They're very round at the front of the body. Become much more compressed towards the back, but they're very round in the front half of the body, almost circular round. They have this greenish back with this pale belly, and usually they have this significant lateral stripe going down the side, through the eye, on the lips, and they create this little mustache on the top lip. That's pretty indicative. But even more indicative, this black spot at the base of the dorsal, the front half of the dorsal, the first 3 rays, that's very, very common. You should be able to see that on all specimens. And I say that because you can see this stripe kind of fade here. Even this one's hard to see. Ignore that picture. This stripe's almost completely gone, but you still see that good spot right there. This picture I chose because it's one of the few I actually found that a fish in water. Most of the time the fish were out of water. Something else that's interesting to note, if the black lateral stripe is there, usually they seem to have a paler stripe right above it, which is a little interesting. That's not always the case. Sometimes it's a very cut off point. It's very much in front. Something else that's interesting to note is the black stripe is predominantly over the lateral line. You can see the lateral line becoming slightly decurved right here and then going straight. And the lateral line is predominantly all over the top of it. It is not encompassing of the lateral line. Just a little interesting stuff there. But it does have this large mouth for being how small it is. I should note, the older a fish is, usually the less you see the stripe. Let's see what else. We got small scales, very, very small scales. And what's interesting about the scalation is that the scales don't actually appear on the fish until they're I found about 26 millimeters long, which is about an inch long. There's been some studies that say they actually start developing scales significantly sooner than that. But I think about an inch long. Now, this fish is definitely a carnivore. Sorry, let's go back to this. This fish is definitely a carnivore. It eats insects and small fish, mollusks. Will eat some crayfish. Sorry about that. But they do seem to eat some vegetation. Now, I want to talk about that though. They're considered an opportunistic predator. Are they actually going after vegetation, or are they going after insects that are on the vegetation and just happen to get some plant material in their mouth when they're doing this? Because you have to remember, when people do diet studies on fish and reptiles and amphibians, usually what they do is, if you can't make the fish or the animal regurgitate, you have to kill the fish and cut it open. So you're doing what's in their stomach. That's how you figure out what they eat. And I would argue that the level of vegetative material in their diet seems to me to point more towards the fact that they are just actively going after insects that are on bits of plant material and just eating the plant material with those insects. Conversely, if they're eating crayfish and things like that that are active, very active in herbivory, you're talking about they possibly are just getting the vegetation from the animals that they are eating. But that's not for me to decide, basically. That's for a scientist, or usually a grad student, to figure out. Now, during reproduction, like a lot of other fish, the males do make pit nests and they defend the pit nests. Like a lot of other minnows, they get these nuptial tubercles, which you can see here. So these are called nuptial tubercles. Here's a close-up of them. They look like warts, or honestly like a parasite. They almost look like, if you've ever seen a fish that has nematodes in it, this is kind of what they look like. But no, those are actual nuptial tubercles. Nuptial tubercles are only developed during breeding, usually only developed during breeding, and essentially they're for defense. Think like bull horns. They are keratin, actually. So they use them as they would use horns. They're not like pounding away at each other underneath the ground, but they do actually have some ritualized headbutting. The size of the nuptial tubercles is obviously a good factor on how well a male is able to defend their nest. That's just how it is. When they are inbreeding, they do develop a little greener back and much more bronze colored fins, especially on the head. You can even see here, this head is pretty bronze as compared to this one. Now this fin is still pretty bronze, don't get me wrong, but they're very, very beautiful when they're inbreeding, as most fish. So the male is defending his nest, and he makes a ridge on top of his pit nest, and he allows a female to come in, and the female is very skittish. It'll come away and run away, come in, run away, come in, run away. Eventually, either the male is not afraid anymore, or the male essentially gets tired of waiting on the female, goes out, grabs the female, and I mean physically will like hook himself around the female and pull her to the nest. And when she gets there, hooray, the male will actually envelop her in a like J embrace, meaning he'll put his fins around one side and wrap his tail around. The female will deposit her eggs. The male will release his milk. And this allows for immediate fertilization of the egg. Now, there does seem to be some dispute whether the male protects the nest after the eggs are deposited or not. I seem to find more evidence that they are not protecting the eggs, but they do protect the nest until all the females that it wants to spawn with are there. So it's a little bit of back and forth. By the way, this is one I believe this is a dead fish, a preserved fish. Something else that's interesting to note, in breeding, this black bar on the right behind the gills seems to become prevalent. I've just kind of noticed that. But you can see even here, this black stripe is extending through the eye. When I say extend through the eye, meaning you can see it in the eyeball itself. You can see it here, but sometimes it's hard to see, especially on that one. Sorry about that. But now, something that's interesting to note, and why this fish has gotten much more popular in recent years among all communities, is that there's been a trend. It was almost a fad for a while, and now you still have people that are absolutely dedicated to it, and people have just kind of forgotten about it. Microfishing. This fish is a very popular microfishing target. What microfishing is that you're going out fishing for these smaller fish with extremely light rod, light tackle, very, very small hooks, small lures, or small bits of night crawlers. And you're trying to actively catch these fish that are, essentially 7 inches and under, or like 150 millimeters and under. Very, very, very small fish. And this fish is one of those really popular because, being an active carnivore, like we were talking about, those fish are usually much more aggressive in that you would catch them. They're much more active. You can catch them versus some of these other microfishing targets that are not necessarily so carnivorous and so active, so you can't fight for them, or they will not fight so much when they do get hit on. Apparently these fight really, really hard for their size, which is the fun of microfishing, opening up that new world, catching fish that you wouldn't normally catch. But now, for the interesting fact that we're going to end the video on, is that they have different behaviors depending on their sort of life cycle, their different age, their stage of life. When they are a juvenile, they are actually a schooling fish, and they school with a bunch of other ones, like other daces and other chubs. They are schooling around trying to protect themselves by sheer numbers. And when they're in the schooling area, they stay within the same 50-meter radius, which is about 165 feet, which is not far at all. That's not a very large area. You're essentially talking about a run in a pool. It's just not very far. As they get larger, they will try to leave the area. They still stay within about 200 meters usually, which is about 650 feet. So even in their moving stage, the teenagers grow up, leave the house, they still stay close by. However, just because they stay within that area and they're going to actively go out there, that does not mean they will be accepted into these other areas. They are actually a very territorial fish, even outside of breeding season. When they are invaded by another of its species in its territory, they have a ritualized aggression. It is more prevalent during breeding, don't get me wrong, but it will happen at all times of year. What they'll do is they have a ritualization called deferred combat. So when two males, or not just two males, when two fish kind of get in there, it's usually males. They engage in a parallel swim. They'll swim upriver. They widen the fins in its mouth and they swim at a caudal beat, meaning they're thumping their tails. Boom, boom. They intimidate the opponent through rituals. Eventually, the forward fish stops and basically blows to the head of the other fish. It'll just pound the fish's head. They kind of go down. When I say pound, they're just like bump, bump, bump. And this is more predominant and very much more seen during breeding, but like I said, it does happen at all times of year. So this is what ensures their territorial dominance. So if you can imagine this fish, let's say an 8-inch long fish going down, they're swimming parallel, kind of thumping their tails, then they go to the bottom, and whoever won, I guess, that swim basically bumps the head of the other male, and this one goes away and this one goes back to its territory. I liken it to mountain goats, mountain sheep. You've ever seen them? The males kind of like, when a new male comes in, they run off to the side and then they just headbutt each other. That's how I kind of liken this to. So this would be like the mountain sheep of the mountain streams, I guess you could say. And I should say they are very prevalent in headwater streams where they're found. But regardless, I hope you enjoy. And regardless, thank you guys so much again. I really appreciate it. Hope to see you again. If I don't, please be safe. Have a great day. Please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. If you do, I really appreciate it. Hope to see you again. If I don't, please be safe. Have a great day. Take care of yourselves. Take care of your loved ones. Please, if you have a fish that you'd like to see, comment it down below. I love reading these comments. And I do want to say something else as well. I got a message from someone in my Discord saying, hey, this one commenter always seems to fact check you. Is that annoying? Or why do I let it happen, basically? And the reason why is because that is part of science. I encourage everyone watching this video to fact check me, to see if what I said was true. I make mistakes, number one. Number two, there's some information out there, conflicting information out there. So if you can prove me wrong, please prove me wrong. I'm okay to admit that. I want you to go out there and do your own research. Look at all the fish I've done. Find what I said was wrong, comment down. We can have a debate. But regardless, once again, take care of yourselves, take care of your loved ones.